We'll
Another
start
3 minutes. Yeah, okay, okay.
start off with the introduction. Good morning, all the construction professionals who have logged in. And good morning, Speaker of the Day, Engineer Mohan Prasad, for having accepted to come over here in spite of your busy schedule for the National Workshop on Recent Advances in Geotechnics for Infrastructure, RAGI 2020. Which is jointly organized by Association of Consulting Civil Engineers India, the Ramco Cements Limited, Indian Geotechnical Society, Bangalore chapter, the National Institute of Engineering, Mysuru, Sri J. Chamarajendra College of Engineering, Mysuru. So yesterday we had the initial discussions by all the representatives from the respective organizations. There was Dr. M.U. Ashwath and representative from Association of Consulting Civil Engineers, Mysore Center as well. And after the opening ceremony, we had the first lecture by Professor Madhav, which was very much very interesting and an eye-opener because he took us away from the textbooks of geotechnology to the practical aspects, which was the need of the day. So today we would be having the second lecture. Engineer P. Mohan Prasad, he has been an active geotechnical consultant for over 2 decades. He heads the geotechnical firm Geomatrix at Bangalore. He has been a consultant to many organizations such as IOCL, IIM Bangalore, IIT Bangalore, KRIDL, KPTCIL, builders and property developers all over Karnataka. He obtained his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Bangalore University and master's degree in geotechnical engineering from IIT Mumbai. He worked as a professor at Bangalore Institute of Technology for 10 years and was an extremely popular teacher motivating the students in area of geotechnical engineering. He has extensively worked in the areas of deep excavations, foundations in difficult environment and ground improvement related to field conditions. In fact, nowadays, we need to give more attention on foundation and soil aspects because that is where the tall buildings stand. And until the foundation is not strong, nothing happens. So after this, let me just also give a brief overview of the forthcoming webinars also. Tomorrow we would be having another webinar again at 11 a.m. and thereafter we would be having the final webinar on Sunday, after which the closing this thing would be there. So those are the series of webinars that we would be streaming as part of the RAGI conference. At Ramco Cements, it has been our philosophy and practice to collaborate with construction professionals in this particular area of knowledge dissemination, because this is being driven by our top management as well. Our chairman, Shri P.R. Venkatramaraja, our CEO, Mr. A.V. Dharmakrishnan, our ED operations, Mr. Srinivasan, and our ED marketing, Mr. Balaji K. Murthy. They have always been in the forefront of collaborating with the customers and offering solutions. And that is where you will find that we have been able to bring in 12 brands of cement based on the requirement of customers. So what we do is that we try to understand the concrete requirements of the customer and based on which the cement is being specified. So we have 4 brands of PPC, 2 brands of PSC. We have ordinary Portland cement brands wherein we have customized cement for concrete with longer slump retention time. So we have been able to interact with construction professionals and projects ranging from individual house builders to major projects and even the precast units wherein the requirement is different in terms of rate of gain of strength. We have been able to give a cement which satisfies the requirement. The Ramco Superfast is one example in which we have been able to fulfill their requirements. So you want a cement for high slump requirement, we have OPC 53 Infra. You want a cement for enhanced durability, we have both the blended cement, we have the PPC and PSC. You want a blended cement with higher compressive strength but lower heat of hydration, we have Ramco Supercrete. So that is the kind of customization that we have been into. So with those few words, let me also say that in this hour of crisis, Ramco Cements has been in the forefront in terms of helping the society, in terms of contributing to the various chief ministers' funds. So we have been able to do that. So if you look at even the procurement and distribution of medical equipments ranging from oxygen concentrators to protective gears to most of the states, we have been able to fulfill that. And ranging from the basic amenities like food, shelter and all that for migrant laborers across all the marketing regions, we have been able to help them out. So this is what Ramco Cements has been doing, and we are very happy to collaborate with all the associations, Association of Consulting Civil Engineers, Geotechnical Society. So let me not take much of the time, and let me again introduce the speaker, Engineer Mohan Prasad, who is an active geo consultant with wide practical experience. So this is the second series of lectures, and the proceedings of the webinar RAGI 2020 is available on the website of ACCI HQ headquarters website, www.acce.in. So you can go to the website and take in the proceedings of this conference, which would be really very much interesting. And with those few words, let me welcome today's speaker, Engineer Mohan Prasad, and I am sure that we would have a lot of insights and takeaway from this talk. Over to you, sir, and welcome to this seminar, Engineer Mohan Prasad.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I suppose I am audible. Right? Am I audible?
You are audible and you are visible also, and your presentation is also seen. You can go ahead.
Thank you very much. So, good morning, everybody. At the outset, I want to thank the organizers and the sponsors for giving an opportunity to share the panel with erudite scholars and address discerning audience. I am really grateful to them. And today's topic is some common misconceptions about geotechnical investigation. As we all know, that geotechnical investigation is a collaborative exercise, an interactive process. We need inputs from structural engineers, construction engineers, architects, and for big projects, we seek inputs from hydrologists, geologists, hydraulic engineers as well. Since it is a collaborative process, this talk aims at clearing some misconceptions about geotechnical investigation with the positive intention of achieving greater understanding, appreciation, cooperation between the participating engineers. Well, another thing I want to clear is this geotechnical investigation is looked at in the context of slope stability analysis, retaining structures, burrow area soil testing, ground improvement techniques, and foundation engineering. And I would be dealing with this geotechnical investigation mostly in the context of foundation engineering. And I know for sure that the audience is a mixed bag with a lot of students, people from construction industry, architects, structural engineers. So I intend to take everybody along. And please excuse me if you find me overemphasizing or dwelling in details, because I want to take everybody on board. Now, like engineers from any other branches, we civil engineers also create systems. It can be a housing system, water supply system, sanitary system, transportation system, irrigation system, or power generation system. All of these systems will have its components. For instance, an housing system may have residential buildings, commercial buildings, public buildings, indoor stadiums, libraries, hospitals, utility lines, and drainage systems, and so on. Similarly, a water supply system may have a jack well, pipeline, water storage systems, and treatment plants, and so on. So all these civil engineering structures will have to be rested on the ground, and obviously we are keen on seeing that these structures are safe, and for that the supporting soil, the supporting ground should be stable, strong, and a study which involves evaluating and assessing the ground condition for its ability to support the civil engineering structures is what that constitutes the geotechnical investigation. So before we dive in, I want to put a few things in a proper perspective. First, the foundation, it is the lowermost part of the structure which is in contact with the ground and which transfers the load of the structure to the subsoil without overstressing. So we want a safe and economical foundation. And for that, the load, the stress, the underlying soil should not be overstressed. So the obvious question is, what happens if the underlying soil is overstressed? Obviously, the soil can fail. The soil can fail in two ways. One is excessive settlement and another is shear failure. So the first type of failure, excessive settlement, let us see what it is. So as we all know that however strong good the ground may be and however light the structure may be, there will be always some settlement. There is nothing one can do about it. But what really matters is the magnitude of settlement or the amount of settlement should be within the permissible limits. If it exceeds permissible limits, if the resulting settlement due to the applied load exceeds permissible limits, then there will be distress in the structural elements. There can be cracks and collapse of structure also is possible. The second type of failure is the shear failure, wherein when the soil is overstressed by the foundation, then the underlying soil may divide or separate itself into zones, blocks, and these blocks may have a tendency to slide past one another. And so this is a typical mode of failure, mode of shear failure. You can see that at the moment of failure, there is a portion of wedge, triangular wedge immediately below the soil, which acts as if it is part of the foundation itself and tries to pierce into the ground like a spear. And the tendency of that wedge to pierce into the ground will make the soil in the zone 2 on either side to rotate with the edge of the footing as hinge. And that can make the soil in the zone 3 on the outermost side to move outwards and upwards, causing a mound. So what we see at the time of failure is the foundation suddenly sinks down and the soil on either side will heave up. So this type of failure is called as shear failure, which is possible in case if the soil below the foundation is overstressed. And this much volume of soil within which the shear failure takes place is called as shear zone. And normally the length of this shear zone will be 3 to 4.5 times the width of the footing, and the depth within which this shear failure takes place may not be more than 1.5 times the width of the footing. So it is not always a symmetrical failure like this figure suggests. Due to non-homogeneity of the soil, the load not being concentric, the failure can take place only on one side also. And then we keep talking about this, the significant depth. When we do the geotechnical investigation, we carry forward the investigation, take down to a depth so that a proper rational assessment of the bearing capacity or allowable bearing pressure is made. Normally, it is 1.5 times the width of the footing to 2 times the width of the footing. So there are some rules up to which will guide us up to what depth we can go for the investigation. And geotechnical investigation to design a safe and economical foundation for a structure, we need a lot of information about subsoil, both by the way of laboratory tests, field tests, and other site conditions. And a study which provides all of these essential information constitutes soil investigation, which goes by other names also: soil exploration, geotechnical investigation, geotechnical exploration, all mean same. So we must be very sure about one thing. The main purpose of geotechnical investigation is to establish the stratigraphy of the site. That is the most important objective, So just I will present a typical stratigraphy. Here you see we have probed the soil from ground surface till the significant depth which I mentioned, so which is 1.5 to 2 times the probable width of the footing. So we have here 1.4 meters thick film, which is loose, heterogeneous, random dump. So as the N value suggests, that this fill is in a very loose condition, and there is groundwater table at a depth of 1.1 meters. And beneath this fill, we have a very dense sandy gravel, which gets classified as GW-GM as per Indian Standard Classification System. And the N value suggests that the stratum is very strong and very less compressible, and we have the shear parameters which suggest the same thing. Beneath that, we have 3.6 meters of medium slip clay, whose water content is 28.7%, N value is just 7, and shear parameters are also in a very modest range, beneath which there is compact weathered rock, which records an N value greater than 50. Beneath that, there is a degraded soft rock. All of that is very strong and less compressible. So a picture which gives the various layers of soil from ground surface till significant depth, the sequence, the thickness of each layer, and the soil is identified in each layer, and the physical and engineering properties. So this is what we call as stratigraphy, which is the raw material for foundation analysis and foundation design, and perhaps the most important objective of geotechnical investigation is to establish a proper stratigraphy at this site. Now we will get into the central theme of the topic. So it's quite possible that there are a lot of misconceptions pervading in the minds of all the participating engineers, geotechnical engineers, structural engineers, architects, construction engineers, clients, and all that. So I am making here an attempt to dispel these misconceptions, which is coming in the way of proper accomplishments. And as I told, I have a positive intention, so that to achieve a greater cooperation and coordination and understanding of this process. Now, this is a typical foundation pitch or a trial pitch. So normally, most normally, what happens is most of the structural engineers, discerning professional structural engineers, they don't skip this first and the most important process in any construction project. But sometimes it so happens that the structural engineer or the contractor or the construction engineer may take upon the role of the geotechnical engineer. So he may ask the contractor or the client to make it at the site till the foundation depth, and we may gauge the bearing capacity by looking at the soil at the foundation level, or he may ask a crowbar to be pierced at the bottom of the pit, and going by how much resistance the soil offers to the piercing of the crowbar, he may judge the bearing capacity, he may assume the bearing capacity. If the bearing capacity assumed by the structural engineer is less than what actually it is, then there will be unnecessary expenditure on the foundation. In case, if the assumed bearing capacity by the structural engineer to proceed with the structural design is very much higher than the actual bearing capacity, then there will be a grave risk of the failure of foundation, and the consequences can be disastrous, all at the cost of clients. So we can see a typical bearing capacity equation, which involves so many factors. Factors related to soil, factors related to dimensions of the footing, factors related to shape of the footing, factors related to inclination of the loads, and factors related to groundwater table. In spite of all this, it will be still there in the back of our mind that there are other factors which are left out, which are at play. Anyway, so slightly a better option would be to consult these presumptive bearing capacity charts. So it gives the safe bearing capacity for different type of soils. So this is a typical bearing capacity chart for cohesionless soils. By that, it is a sand or gravel, so it's granular deposits. So these are the SBC values for different type of soils in different compactness. And this is the presumptive bearing capacity chart for rocks. And this is for cohesive soils. But none of these charts make a claim that these values hold true. These are just indicative. They are just suggestive. They can be taken as rough guidelines to start the work with. All of them insist that a rigorous, rational geotechnical investigation should be carried out to ascertain the allowable bearing pressure and do the foundation design. So it has to be taken with a pinch of salt. And so such a estimation is all right in case if it is a very light structure. So geotechnical investigation is very important. At times, we have advised our clients to demolish the structure in case if it has, in one case, it was a 8-story building and it went out of plumb to 8 inches. And with a lot of difficulty, we had to advise the client to demolish the structure. Hardly the cost of investigation may not exceed 0.5%. 0.5% of the total project cost. So it is a false economy to save on this. So this is inevitable and it's very important. Now, the second is about nature, extent, and depth of exploration. So let me tell very briefly what it is meant by that. Nature of exploration. A lot of options, methods, techniques are available for subsurface exploration and the determination of allowable bearing pressure, settlement, and so on. It can be a simple test pit or trial pit, and maybe it is justifiable only in the case of unimportant temporary lightweight structures. Sometimes we prefer to make a borehole, take the soil samples at different depths, and run laboratory tests on them to find the compressibility characteristics. They are fed into the bearing capacity analysis along with other relevant factors, and it is done. And we have indirect methods also, like field tests, static cone penetration test, dynamic cone penetration test, standard penetration test, plate load test, pressure meter test, or even geophysical exploration like electrical resistivity method, seismic method, and so on. So I have a lot of options to accomplish a subsurface exploration, and it is our discipline as geotechnical engineers based on relevant aspects. For example, and extent of exploration. Put simply, what it means is the number of boreholes in a particular site for carrying out intensive investigation. You know that the number of boreholes, for example, we have a rough guideline here. For high-rise, if the soil conditions are found to be very, very uniform, the boreholes can be spaced 45 meters apart. And if the soil conditions are less than uniform, then the boreholes can be spaced 30 meters apart. And if the soil conditions are found to be very non-uniform, very erratic, then the boreholes cannot be spaced at an interval not greater than 15 meters. All in all, a minimum of 5 boreholes would be necessary. Similarly, for different type of structures, the number of boreholes required and the distance interval between the boreholes is all indicated. Again, we have to make clear that this is just a guideline. For example, the Bureau of Indian Standards suggests that for an area as big as 0.4 hectares, that is 4,000 square meters, 5 boreholes should be all right, one at each corner and one in the center. But ultimately, the decision to have the number of boreholes, how many boreholes per site, rests with geotechnical engineer, and it is done on a rational basis. And here we have the depth of exploration. If it is isolated or raft footing, the depth of exploration should be 1.5 times the foundation width minimum. Usually it should be 2 times. And if the footings are very close to each other, then the depth of exploration should be 1.5 times the length, not the width. Similarly, for other type of substructures and projects, we have different depth of exploration suggested by the Bureau of Indian Standards. And this can again serve as a guideline, and it is not mandatory. So geotechnical engineer is free to exercise his judgment depending upon the all relevant aspects. And reconnaissance. The depth of reconnaissance is the first stage in any geotechnical investigation. Essentially, it is an information gathering process. It involves visual observations, and we will be consulting the maps and charts. For instance, we may take the inputs from geologists to know the various formations, and we may make observations. There may be rocky outcrops, and also the open wells, cuts, ravines, slides, escarpments. All of this will give an idea what the stratigraphy at the site may be like. And we may also gather some information from the structures surrounding the site, like what type of foundation is provided, up to what depth the foundations are taken, did they come across any bedrock, or did they come across groundwater table. We may observe if there are any signs of distress in the building due to which can contribute to poor subsoil conditions, and if there are any water bodies around the site, we will observe and we will make inquiries what could be the maximum rise of the groundwater table, or we may also see if there are any sources which can pollute or contaminate the subsoil and the groundwater chemically, or is there any severe organic contamination? And all of this, and also the drainage, both surface drainage and subsurface drainage. So all these factors, all these observations and details will guide us to decide what should be the nature of exploration, what should be the extent of exploration, and what should be the depth of exploration. Of course, it goes without saying that this also depends upon the proposed structure. What type of structure is supposed to be built at the site. And sometimes we go ahead with the preliminary investigation. As we go along the preliminary investigation, we stumble upon something which will tell us that the investigation need not be very elaborate, or the investigation has to be carried to greater length. It has to be a very detailed investigation. I can cite an example. So recently we did a soil investigation in Banashankari. Even after going up to 7 meters, we found nothing but filled up soil, all kind of things, building debris, municipal waste, different type of soils. And then we made inquiry in the neighborhood. We were told that it was a quarry earlier which has been filled. So then we decided to abandon the option of open foundations. So we had to go for deep foundations, pile foundations. And obviously, we need a deeper soil data for a pile foundation. And we suggested the clients that we have to do mechanical boring and go to about 15 to 20 meters depth or wherever the system begins in that quarry, and in order to make a rational design of pile foundation. And it was agreed. So I just cited one example. As we go along the investigation, then we may have to revise the investigation program itself. That is also possible. So this is another guideline, depth of exploration. And I told you I have many options. One of the option is to go for the field test. This is very popular, widely used field test, standard penetration test, where the dropping weight of 65 kgs from a height of 75 centimeter will make the split spoon sampler at the bottom of borehole to penetrate into the soil. We count the number of blows required for 30 centimeter penetration by this dropping weight falling freely to a height of 75 centimeters, and that is called as end value. Of course, this is something which will have to be taken with a pinch of salt, and we have to apply corrections to the raw end values we get from the field. There are two types of corrections, correction for overburden and correction for dilatancy. And then we have another type of field test, which is very familiar, plate load test. Here, a test plate is loaded and a relation is developed between the applied load and the corresponding settlement. And this load settlement curve can serve as basis for obtaining the bearing capacity and the settlement and so on. But this should be opted for where the other options are not there. For instance, if it is not possible to extract undisturbed samples, or if the subsoil is highly heterogeneous, then this test may be preferable. And again, we should be very careful, because what is true for a small size plate may not be true for a full size footing. So they call it as scale effect. So it has to be, the result should be interpreted with a lot of caution. So you can see in case of cohesive soils, the size of the loaded area doesn't matter much as far as bearing capacity is concerned. And in case of cohesionless soils, you can see that there is an equation which has to be used. And the third misconception is the depth and type of foundation. To begin with, a structural engineer or architect is free to assume a certain type of foundation placed at a certain depth. It is a norm. There is no problem with that. But ultimately, in the end, it has to be vetted and validated by geotechnical engineer, because there are a lot of factors which come into play while making this decision. First, the depth of the foundation. There is what is called as minimum depth of foundation, and we must respect that minimum depth, and then the foundation should be placed beyond the reach of burrowing animals. Foundation should be placed in such a way that there is no underscouring because of drainage or a water or a drain or something like that by the side of the foundation, which may result in loss of employment, and it may result in loss of removal of soil from the below the foundation, loss of support, and so on. And then if there is a fill, if it is not an engineered fill, which means if it is a random dump, then again it is not reliable, because these fills cannot be characterized properly with any reasonable degree of accuracy. So it is better to bypass the fill and take the foundation well into the natural strata, at least by 0.5 meters. And again, the groundwater table, that is also a factor which will come into the play while deciding the depth of the foundation. And consider the other two cases. Say suppose if there is a clay deposit whose consistency is very modest, then the clay can flow plastically from the sides, and the bottom of the foundation excavation may heave up. We call this as bottom heave. So it can be calculated at what depth it happens, knowing the soil. And again, this is very avoidable. So the foundation depth will have to be decided considering that in medium stiff or soft clay deposits are there in the side. And consider another case where there is a clay deposit underlain by granular deposit, and the area is waterlogged. The groundwater table corresponds to the ground surface. Then if you take the foundation depth close to the interface between the clay and the granular soil or near somewhere there, suddenly the bottom of the foundation excavation pit may fail and water may start gushing up. We call this as bottom failure, and the depth of the foundation should be fixed, keeping this in the mind if that is the situation. And of course, the depth of the foundation is also decided based on the proposed structure, the stratigraphy, and the tolerance limits will also come into the play while deciding this. Then the type of foundation, as you can see, we have different type of foundation, each with its own advantages. So we should be able to exploit the advantages offered by each of the foundations. And the type of foundation is decided on the basis of subsoil condition and stratigraphy, groundwater table position, type of structure and the loadings, and the tolerance of the structure. That is, what is the limit for angular distortion, what is the limit for differential settlement, what is the limit of total settlement specified in the course. IS 1904 is the code which gives all these details. So depending upon this, we decide the depth and type of foundation. So I can give you one example. This is the stratigraphy. Now we have to decide what should be the depth of foundation. Obviously, the fill at the top being used heterogeneous random dump, we have to bypass that. And there is water table at 1.10 meters. So we have to place the foundation within the natural strata, which is quite hard, and we should take advantage of that. If the foundation depth is greater than this, then the foundation will be resting on this poor soil. So that may invite problems. So this hard stratum can act as a raft if there is sufficient thickness of it below the foundation level. And in case if the load coming from the columns, structural loads are very heavy, then we may opt for deep foundations like piles and all. So here there is a very hard stratum by the way of compact weather rock whose N value is greater than 50. Below that, there is a degraded soft rock, though the RQD is 0%, which means it is highly fractured, highly degraded. The N value is greater than 100. So these two layers may prove to be very good bearing stratum where the piles may be rested. So the type and depth of foundation is based on certain relevant aspects. So it is better left to the discretion of geotechnical engineers. So to begin with, the structural engineer or architect can assume something, but ultimately it has to be decided by geotechnical engineers. That's what I mean. Now, this geotechnical investigation does not happen in isolation. There are inputs necessary from structural engineers and architects. It so happens sometimes we get inquiries regarding the structural engineer may tell, why do you need all this information? All we want is the bearing capacity. The implied meaning of that is the bearing capacity is a unique value and it has got nothing to do with the structure, but that is not the reality. We need to know all the pertinent and relevant details about the proposed structure in order to make a judicious decision regarding the foundations. First, the layout plan of the site. We would like to know where exactly the proposed structure is going to be seated within the site, because we don't want to end up doing our geotechnical investigation in a portion where the structure is not coming up. We have done the investigation in one place, but the structure is sitting elsewhere. And this is one experience I normally come across in case of KPTCL receiving stations, substations. They acquire large tracts of area, 2 to 3 acres, 4 acres for substations. And they won't tell us where exactly the control rooms, transformers, and transmission towers, staff quarters will come. So many times it has happened. We have done this soil investigation in one place, and when we visit that site sometime later, we see that all these structures are elsewhere. So it defeats the very purpose of soil investigation. So a layout plan showing the position of the proposed structure within the site should be provided by the client, whether it is structural engineer or architects, or construction engineers or the clients. And we need to know the column location drawing as well. because from that I can figure out what is the minimum span. From that, I can figure out what is the permissible angular distortion. I can figure out what is the permissible differential settlement. From that, I can work out what is the permissible total settlement, and I can see to that because of the foundation pressure, the settlements doesn't exceed these permissible values. So I need to know the span. It is very important. You can see that. You can see that the span L comes into the picture. So it is not as if the permissible settlements are same for all structures, all type of soils and all type of foundations. This is IS 1904, which gives the permissible values of angular distortion, differential settlement, and maximum settlement for different type of structures, different type of foundations tested on different type of soils. And we need to know unfactored loads on each column. This is very important for us to proportion the footings. And we need to know the number of floors. If the structure is very tall, if it's a high-rise building, I will have to factor the wind load also into the foundation analysis. And we need to know the type of the structure. Is it a temporary structure or a permanent structure, lightweight structure or a massive structure? Is it a masonry structure or a steel structure or a composite structure, RCC structure, or it may be something like a signpost or a high mast lighting or a high mast signage or a reservoir or storage water tank, water storage tank, or a telecommunication tower or a transmission tower. So the course of investigation, the foundation analysis, the foundation design, everything will be different depending upon these aspects. So this information should be provided by the structural engineers and architects. And then coming to the basement details. So to accommodate the basement flow, we have to remove the soil, excavate, and this removal of overburden will cause a stress relief at the foundation level. And obviously that will add up to the bearing capacity. That means the bearing capacity will increase by the way of going to basement. So roughly, if one floor of basement causes overburden removal of 3 meters. So this 3 meters of soil is removed to accommodate one basement floor, and it is equivalent to the weight of 4 upper floors, which means if you go for a single basement and 4 upper floors, you will not be putting any additional pressure at all at the foundation level. So this is very important. We need to know the depth of the basement floor with respect to the ground surface. And we also would like to know whether there will be basement under the entire structure or it's a partial basement and so on. And we also would like to know future plans. Presently, the clients could be constructing G+2 building. But after a couple of years, they may add 2 more floors on the top. And if the foundation is not designed to take the load of additional 2 floors, which you will be putting up later, then it will be a problem. So it is not easy to improve the capacity of the foundation. It's a very elaborate process. So it is better if the clients indicate what are the future plans. So these are the permissible total and differential settlement as given by IS 1904. So again, the geotechnical engineer can use this as a guideline. So, JRM has given the permissible limits of the differential settlement. One can consult that also. So ultimately, discretion should be used what to pick for figuring out the permissible limits of.
There's a slight problem with the audio, sir. It's not
Out.
Yeah, now it's okay. In between, there is a problem.
I'll cut the volume. Now, the next misconception, so to say. So, the main objective of any geotechnical investigation is to design the foundation, to find the allowable bearing pressure, the foundation pressure at which the possibility of failure is not there. So if the foundation depths are great and if there is going to be basement, then an additional problem comes into the picture. It is stabilizing or supporting the sides of the excavation. And if it is overlooked, then there is a grave possibility of sides caving in and endangering the lives of the people working within the excavation. And also it can destabilize the adjoining structures, which again is a problem. And if there is already a building by the side of the site, the loads coming on the footings of the neighboring building may disperse into the site, and so the loads can get transferred. That also must be looked into. And if the adjacent ground is at lower level, then there can be flowing and loss of embedment. So you may have to provide a retaining wall to retain the earth so that the embedment and the support is ensured. It is not compromised. And we will have to look into the other aspects as well. If the structure, proposed structure is going to be tested, site is a sloping ground, or if the proposed structure is going to be at the foot of the slope or at the top of the slope, and if there is any drain by the side of the site, and if the area is waterlogged during foundation construction stage, the groundwater table has to be depressed and an appropriate dewatering program has to be planned. And this dewatering program, that itself can become a source of problem for the adjoining structures. It can destabilize structure. So a lot of logical decisions are necessary. And if the site is rocky, the rocks will have to be broken, blasted, and again that can disturb the adjoining structures. So a suitable program should be worked out for removing the rock. And if the structure is, proposed structure is going to be rested on human piles, the pile driving, hammering, that can also disturb the adjacent structures. And normally, some filling will become necessary before placing the floor slab, and a proper decision should be made what type of soil should be used for filling and how it should be compacted. So all these collateral issues, associated issues should be dealt, and planning should be made well before the construction project begins. And it would be ideal if all these issues, along with the design of foundation, determination of allowable bearing pressure, is packed together and entrusted to a geotechnical agency, because the agency which carries out the geotechnical investigation for foundation is better equipped and will have a better conception about subsoil conditions at that site, and will be able to come up with a more rational, ideal, effective solution to all these collateral issues. So a construction engineer or a structural engineer or an architect should be able to foresee all these problems well in advance and pack it into a bundle and entrust to geotechnical engineering. Well, then the next misconception is when the bearing capacity, when the site is rocky. So normally the tendency is, if the site is rocky, then it is rocky, what is the necessity of geotechnical investigation? We can assume a bearing capacity of 50 tons per square meter or 60 tons per square meter and go ahead with our structural design. But the bearing capacity of a rocky foundation material can be as much as 600 tons per square meter or 800 tons per square meter. We should be able to leverage the goodness of this rocky formation so that much can be saved on the foundation expenditure. So a rocky foundation material also can fail like any other foundation material. It can fail by excessive settlement. In fact, the guiding code IS 12070, which deals with the bearing capacity of the rocks, stipulates that the permissible settlement for rocky foundation material is 12 mm, which is much stringent than what it is for soil. So the logic is In case of rocky foundation material, the heterogeneity is the biggest problem. So it will be highly heterogeneous, and there is the degree of fracture, the discontinuities, and what is filled in the cracks matters a lot. And we have a parameter which encompasses, which involves all of these infirmities in the rock mass, and it is called as rock mass rating. And one can get the safe bearing capacity for a rocky foundation material from the charts given in this code IS 12070 corresponding to different RMR values, that is rock mass rating values. So this is the rock mass rating RMR. As you can see, all the factors, most of the factors have been taken into consideration, including RQD, rock quality designation. Sometimes foundations are designed based on the uniaxial compressive strength of the rock multiplied with coefficient of joints, which represents the degree of fracture. But a better and more rational method would be to go on the basis of RMR, rock mass rating. And if the rocky formation is highly weathered, it is hardly rock. So if it's a transitional material between soil and rock, then one can think of DCPT, that is dynamic core penetration test, or pressure meter test, or plate load test, and one can get the bearing capacity based on that also. And another thing one should be careful about is while placing the footings on the rock mass, all the loose material should be removed and it should be leveled. And if necessary, the footing should be bolted to the rock mass because the size of the footing should be normally less than what it will be for other foundation materials. And if the moment is large, then some kind of fixity becomes necessary. So benching and bolting becomes necessary. Now, the next misconception. So sometimes the subsoil conditions at a site will be very difficult, very problematic, very troublesome, very challenging. And normally people will have a binary thinking. If it is not open foundation, if it is not isolated footing, let it be pile foundation or rack foundation. There is a whole range of options available between these two extremes. For instance, if there is a very thick deposit of weak soil which is very compressible, so there are many things one can do. Bypass this weak soil completely and take the foundation all the way down where the firm stratum is available with adequate bearing capacity. So that's where the pile foundations and piers all come into picture. And the second option available is to modify the weak soil by the way of ground improvement techniques and make it come up to our level of requirement, our level of expectation. So there are a lot of ground improvement techniques. So I have indicated just one of them. These insertions or inclusions called as granular piles. It can be sand pile or stone column. It can go up to the firm stratum or it can be a floating column also. So then after installing this, we can go for normal foundations because the bearing capacity would have got greatly improved because of these ground improvement techniques. There are other techniques are also possible, like dynamic compaction and grouting and reinforcement. And the other type of ground improvement techniques are there, preloading, PVDs, and so on. So a proper assessment has to be made because all the ground improvement techniques will not be suitable for all the conditions. We have to pick the right one. So you can see that the third option is matching the foundation to tackle the complexity. So we can design the foundation in such a way that this problem is overcome. For example, these floating foundations, this is a typical building where there are 3 basement floors. So like I mentioned before, each basement floor can cause a stress relief equivalent to 4 upper floors. That means if you construct 12 floors, because of these 3 basement floors, there will not be any additional stress at the base. And the another option is going for the rack. You can see here, form stratum is available at shallow depths in one place. Elsewhere, there is a deep deposit, and there can be bouldery intrusions as well. So that would be an ideal choice where there is heterogeneity. So here, the form stratum is available at shallow depths, so one can go for open foundations, testing the foundation on the form stratum itself. And the next misconception is goes both for the geotechnical engineer as well as the structural engineer. So the structural engineer should insist that the geotechnical engineer visits the site during the geotechnical investigation and also when the ground is opened up to see whether the prevailing soil conditions at the foundation level matches with what has been reported in the geotechnical report. It's quite possible sometimes there will be some local infirmities like a filled up open well or a wall or something like that. There can be soft pockets which will go undetected during the geotechnical investigation. So it is better if geotechnical engineer visits the site after the ground is opened up for the foundation so that there is uniform conditions prevail or whatever condition he has assumed in his foundation analysis and design. And also, when geotechnical engineer is there at the site during geotechnical investigation, we can visually inspect the area and make inquiries in the neighborhood and observe the cuts, hills, topography, the drainage conditions, and so on. And you can also observe the drilling effort and the stratigraphy as the drilling process goes on. And you can have a rough conception about the subsoil conditions even during the field work itself. And history of the site will have to be ascertained. So what the site was earlier. So I can recall one incident. So there was a hillock was chopped and leveled, and the layout was formed where this building was coming up in the site. So it was a massive hillock which has been removed, chopped off, and leveled. So now, thinking logically, if the subsoil at the foundation level to take the weight of this massive hill, definitely it is in a position to take the weight of the structure, which is very small fraction in terms of weight. So all these things should not be missed, and it's quite possible that the site might have been a dumping yard, something like that, which has been filled, and whether the ground is horizontal, level, or is it sloping, the drainage conditions, and also a geotechnical engineer should be able to foresee problems that can creep during the foundation construction stage, like breaking the rock, supporting the sides of the foundation pits, or dewatering, and come up with a plan to tackle the situation. So, geotechnical engineer should visit the site during geotechnical investigation as well as during foundation construction stage. Because many a times our plans, our designs, our recommendations will not be fulfilled during the foundation construction stage. For example, in case of pile foundations, we insist that it should be tremi-concreting. Sometimes the piling contractor will make a hole, put the reinforcement, and simply pour the concrete instead of tremi-concreting. And if the soil is chemically aggressive, then proper cover should be maintained for the pile. So all these things can be monitored and instructed to the piling contractor to see that all the recommendations are executed respectively. So you can see the different cases where the foundations are resting on the slope and top of the slope, and this is the footing of an adjacent building, and this is the footing for the proposed structure. So the distance and difference in level should be maintained so that the influence of this footing will be minimal. These loads will not disperse and come on this footing. Now, most of the times, the foundation material can be clay or sand. rather let us put it this way, it will be a fine grained soil like clay and silt, or it can be granular deposits like sand and gravel or whatever. So people are normally scared about clay. Everybody has got their own favorite phobia. Of course, if the soil is black cotton soil, one should be concerned because it is a well settled fact that black cotton soil is a problematic soil if not dealt with. So it's an expensive soil because of the mineral of which it is made.
Sir, at certain positions, we are able to hear you properly. When you shift your head, no, the voice is not audible. There is a break in the voice.
Thank you. I'll take care of that. And strangely enough, this clay seems to ape and mimic human behavior. So you can consider the cohesion. Normally people stick together at times of crisis. In unity and solidarity to face the problem. We need not take this as literally, take it metaphorically, because in the present corona crisis, it is not advisable to stick together. We have to maintain the distance, which is why we are having a webinar instead of seminar. So similarly, the clay particles also stick together, bond with each other, for the reasons that these clay particles carry electrical charges on them, because of which it attracts water molecules, which is dipolar. There can be many layers of water molecules surrounding the clay, and a capillary phenomenon comes into play, and this capillary meniscus, which is in tension, will pull the particles together and reach this cohesion property. We cannot call it as property because it is very transient. And the next thing is we are seeing people accumulating a lot of wealth and earn more than what is really necessary. So their hunger for the money looks insatiable, and also they will be very reluctant to part with what they have earned. And clay seems to do the same thing. It soaks up a lot of water in relation to other earth materials. So the water content can be as much as 800%, 1000% in case of soils like peach, which means the weight of water in the soil 8 to 10 times more than the weight of the dry particles. And also, because of low permeability, it doesn't give away water easily. All the water it holds, it is very difficult. Even if you put some clay soil into the furnace, the water content will not become 0% because some water will be there, mineralogically combined with in the clay particles. And then consider this: we human beings, something very serious, strong happens to us, and we may not react or respond immediately. So we take our time to weigh our options and come up with a proper, proportionate response. Similarly, clay also, if you load it, the corresponding settlement will not happen immediately or instantaneously. It will take its own sweet time to complete the settlement corresponding to the applied load, and which is what we call as consolidation settlement. So this consolidation settlement may go on for years, even decades. So that is one of the problems with the clay. Now, consider another behavior of the clay, which runs parallel to human behavior. Say, suppose if we are hit by something, struck by something, it will throw us out of balance, and we may lose our composure, we may lose our balance, we may lose our strength, and after some time, we will get back, we will regain our composure and gain our strength to see through the things. And similar thing happens in case of clay also. If you disturb the original structure, it will lose its strength partially or fully, and we call that property of clay as sensitivity. And if you allow some time, it may gain back the property it has lost, partially or fully, and that property of clay is called as fixation. And look at the next thing, the swelling and shrinkage. As long as good things keep coming to us, we'll be happy, we swell. And when we start losing it, we'll be downcast. And something similar happens with the clay also. So when it drinks lot of water is absorbed, it swells. And when it loses water by the way of evaporation, it shrinks. This swelling and shrinkage are expansiveness. And this volumetric variation is very severe in the case of black cotton soil. That is the reason for branding it, labeling it as a problematic soil. And of course, this volumetric variation, which corresponds to variation in moisture, happens in other type of clays also, but it may not be as much as in this black cotton soil, so which is an expansive soil. An expansive soil need not be necessarily black, but somehow this misconception has gone around that any clay which is black is called as black cotton soil by uninitiated engineers. So it need not be so. What makes the difference is the amount of montmorillonite mineral in the clay. So in case of expansive soil, this mineral will be there as majority portion. And we keep getting calls sir, we have made the foundation pits and it looks like we have come across clay. We are worried. We are concerned. Please, why don't you come and do the soil testing? As if all clays are very problematic. That is not so. By and large, clay is just as good or as bad as any other foundation material, keeping apart the BC soil. So then there is what is called as pre-consolidation pressure. Something happens to us which has got a profound influence on us, and it is not easy for us to delete or erase this, and we remember that and we keep recalling that something happens like that for clay also. If it is subjected to very high pressure sometime in the past, which is not there presently, it won't forget. If you do a consolidation test on a clay sample which has experienced or suffered very high stress in the past, it will tell what is the maximum pressure it has experienced in the past, which may not be there presently. So this quality, human quality of remembering and recalling is there in the clay also. So the maximum pressure a clay has experienced in the past and consolidated to that pressure is called as pre-consolidation pressure, and it has got a lot of influence in our foundation design, foundation analysis. And then the last thing, the varying consistency. Many times you heard people telling, I'm not a machine. I do have my mood swings. So clay also will have its mood swings. Say suppose if there is a lot of water, keeping it in a liquid state, it will look like soup. It's practically no shear strength at all. It can flow like liquid. And if you remove some of the water from that clay, it will be in a plastic state, somewhat like soft butter. And if you dry it up further, it will come to semi-solid state, and then it will be somewhat like cheese. And if you reduce the water content further, it will come to a solid state, somewhat like candy. So the consistency varies, and consistency depends upon the quantity of water present in the clay. To sum up, what I can say about this particular factor is what matters as far as clay soils are concerned is the water content. Apart from other factors, water content has got profound influence on the behavior of clay deposits. But when it comes to sandy deposit, what is most important is the confinement and the compactness. Many times we do the soil investigation, and at the foundation level, the sand is there, and the client or the contractor may become apprehensive. Sir, I could scoop out the soil with my bare hands at the foundation level. There the confinement pressure is zero. So if there is confinement, there will be, as you go down, the confinement will be greater and it will have its strength. So that is about sandy deposits. There is nothing to be worried. So I can say anything can be built anywhere provided the structural engineers or the contractors or the clients allow the freedom, flexibility, latitude to for our discretion, judgment to tackle the situation. So it may be expensive or elaborate, but it may not be impossible. It may not be impossible. Now, coming to the last misconception. So many times people don't take these geotechnical reports very seriously. All they do is see the last page where the recommendations are made. They see what is the type of foundation recommended and what is the depth of the foundation, what is the bearing capacity, and it looks like that's all they want. And afterwards, it is thrown away in some place. So we must all realize that the geotechnical report is a legal document. It has got legal validity, so it should be preserved carefully because if something goes wrong, that is a valid fix. So, in order to the work order, the payment details, everything should be formal, official, in black and white, so that it can be proved at any point of time. Also, in case of geotechnical reports, the correct and complete address of site should be mentioned. And also the client should be identified by the name and their full address. If it is a company, the name of the company. And also it should be indicated in the geotechnical report, the date of investigation, the date of report submission, and so on. And also the details of the proposed structure as given by the clients, the authorities for the project, geotechnical investigation project. And then the details of the methodology adopted in carrying out the geotechnical investigation also should be mentioned. And there should be a bore log giving out the sampling details, N values, the position of the groundwater table, termination depths, and all the boring details. And also there should be design parameter or design criterion adopted in the analysis of design, and also a detailed calculation in the report. And the boreholes, the position of the boreholes in the site, either by the way of photos or a diagram showing the position of the boreholes within the site, and or rather the X, Y, Z coordinates of the points where the boreholes were done, so that nothing is left to uncertainty. And the datum, all the levels and depths are referred with respect as to a certain datum, which should be mentioned very clearly in the report. And also the properties would have been determined for the soil, subsoil. So it should be mentioned at what depth the samplings were done, and those properties, index properties or engineering properties, whatever, they correspond to what depth, which borehole, and all those details should be there. And also the recommendation should be unambiguous, specific, and details. Nothing should be left hanging in the air. Well, I want to make once again one thing very clear. The purpose of addressing this issue of misconception is very positive one. To make the interaction, collaboration between the geotechnical engineers and the participating engineers, like structural engineers or architects or construction engineers, more fruitful, so that the objectives are accomplished without any hurdles. I'm not being generic. So these misconceptions could be there in some quarters. So it has to be dealt with. Lastly, I'm coming to the end of my talk. Lastly, so we means geotechnical engineers, we have been at the receiving end for our investigation works being somewhat patchy, vague, nebulous, arbitrary, and so on. But we must also understand and appreciate the conditions and circumstances in which we work. So unlike structural engineers who work with materials which are artificially composed in controlled conditions, like concrete and steel, we have to deal with the natural material soil whose character is highly variable. It varies with respect to location, it varies with respect to depth, it varies with respect to seasons, it can vary with respect to stress levels also. And secondly, the domain is not fixed. For instance, if you take the settlement problem or the bearing capacity problem, the volume of soil involved, the extent of soil involved, domain is not properly fixed. So we demarcate arbitrarily that some portion of the soil participate and has got significant influence on the overall behavior. And the material we deal with, that is soil, is hidden below the surface. Even if we carry out an exhaustive investigation, we would have tested, sampled and tested only 1/1,000,000th of the total volume, which is going to be affected by this construction project. And for instrumentation, this goes for the boring equipments, sampling equipments, and testing machines and all that. It would be an understatement if I say the instrumentation is poor. And there is another factor, the sample disturbance. However refined our sampling techniques may be, however good our samplers may be, there will be some disturbance to the natural field or in situ conditions of the soil. The density could have disturbed, the texture could have disturbed, the structure could have disturbed, water content could have disturbed in the process of extraction, during transit, or during the preparation of the specimens from the samples, or during the testing process itself. So all this disturbance will get reflected in the final results, which is what that makes, you know, to the importance of these test results. We'll have to be a little cautious. We cannot take anything on the face value. Sometimes it has happened. We have ruled out our own laboratory tests instead, based our calculations and design on the field test results. You know, in case of field tests, a greater volume of soil is involved, and also the soil gets tested in its in situ conditions, and that is very important. And say suppose, even if you have brought a soil sample which is least disturbed, during the testing, we may not be able to recreate, duplicate, or simulate all the prevailing in situ conditions during the testing process also. And that is another contributing factor to the approximation of the final results. And then coming to the analysis, we make a lot of simplifying assumptions, idealizations, approximations, and so as to keep the analysis simple, avoid complexities, and again, all that will get reflected in our final results and recommendations. And also the number of parameters participating in any geotechnical phenomenon are too many compared to other materials. And that again will contribute. We may not be able to factor all those parameters. Then the analysis becomes unwieldy, very complex. And relatively speaking, comparatively speaking, our field is more empirical. That is also another source of approximation. And I am listing out all this, I'm telling this for other engineers and clients to be really considerate. So that's it. And I thank you all the and responses. Once again, profoundly, for giving us opportunity to talk, address you. I am open to questions.
Thank you so much, sir, for that excellent presentation. Would you like to take some questions, or would you like to take a break?
It's all right, I can take questions.
It was a very good presentation wherein you have outlined very clearly the misconceptions in the area of investigation and the coordination problems between, the challenges of coordination between the engineers as well as geotechnical experts. That is excellent. One of the questions that has come is how to account for soft pocket in rock foundation in deep excavation.
That is a big problem. The rocky formation may not be there on the entire site. There can be some soil patch, called talus. So, but one should be careful to keep the permissible sediment that applies for the rock, for the soil also, which is 12 mm. And when it comes to rock, it is the better option would be to excavate the soft material, the soil or whatever, talus or whatever, and rest all the footings on the rock So the footing depths may vary for different footings. That's it.
How close two isolated footings can be placed in order to, if suppose how close it can be if there are two isolated footings?
In order to avoid complexities in the structural design may keep it so close that the footing should be nearly touching each other. So one can as well go for the split footing instead of these isolated footings which are very close. And again, one convention, one norm is if the total area of the footing is more than 50% of the footprint area of the proposed structure, one can put the rack itself. So there will be always some mutual influence which will have to be taken into consideration during the foundation analysis.
Is rectangular footing preferable for rectangular columns in terms of pressure bulb?
That is the norm. If the cross section of the column is rectangular, the footing is also kept rectangular. That is the norm.
How to consider the advantage provided by the basement in the bearing capacity calculation?
I talked about this before. So if you remove the overburden to accommodate the basement flow, so the soil at the foundation level is relieved of that much pressure, which can be added to the bearing capacity. So in fact, sometimes we suggest the clients to go for basement in order to bypass the weak soils at shallow depths, and also it adds to the bearing capacity. So I talked about floating foundation. There can be partial floating foundations as well. So it's a good idea many a times. And then there will be associated problems like providing retaining structures all around. And also there should be a good drainage system that can get accumulated in the basement. We have seen many a times the basements can become swimming pools if this drainage is not addressed properly, drainage problems. So I can remember one example. In Nagarbavi, there is NAC building, National Accreditation Council. There, the basement has become a swimming pool. That's which is the record room, and there will be ankle deep water during the monsoon. So all these issues are very pertinent. In fact, we talked about it. All this should be taken care of. Of course, in that particular case, water table was not encountered at the time of geotechnical investigation. Later, surrounding the site, there was a lot of development, a lot of buildings, and the water started seeping into the ground, which could not find its way in the downward direction because of an impervious stratum. And all of that found its way into the basement of the snack building, and it became a problem. So I would suggest whether the groundwater table is there or not to factor in the bearing capacity because groundwater design could change.
Now, while designing mat foundation on clay or elevated water tank, load pressure is greater than SBC of soil. Preferring pile for water tank is costlier. For this case, which foundation is preferable?
Please come again.
While designing mat foundations on clay for elevated water tank, load pressure is greater than SBC of soil. Preferring pile for water tank is costlier. For this case, which foundation is preferable? That is the question asked by Mr. Tamilarsan. Yeah.
Ultimately, the bottom line is the foundation soil should be able to take whatever loads that are coming. So as I said earlier, there are many type of foundations. So yesterday, Professor Madhav was talking about the combination of raft and pile. So piled foundation, where you can take the advantage of the load carrying capacity of the pile as well as raft. We can use it in combination.
In some residential building, after 4 to 5 years, flooring gets damaged. What is the reason and what is its remedy? Has it something to do with the foundation?
This is a very common problem. So, in fact, it's a very common problem. Somehow the soil is not compacted properly. Virtually nowhere I have seen all our recommendations are respected when it comes to compaction process. So the compaction, the filling should be done properly, which means first a proper soil should be chosen. A granular, well draining, well graded soil should be chosen for filling, and it should be compacted in layers with appropriate compaction techniques and maintaining the water content properly, placement water content which should match with optimum moisture content. And in any case, this clay soil should be avoided because it cannot be compacted properly. And there are other problems also with clay soil. So the preferable soil is granular soil, well graded and well draining soil, and it should be compacted properly. This can become a serious problem in case of industrial structures because of the intensive loading, isolated intensive loading because of machinery or a gantry crane or something like that. So in spite of compacting the soil properly, they go for grid slab with a special type of flooring.
What are the soil parameters that are influenced in equipment supporting foundation? What are the soil parameters that are influenced in equipment supporting foundation? If suppose a foundation that supports equipment, what are the soil parameters that are getting influenced?
It depends upon what equipment. For instance, we make it a matter of routine in case of industrial structures about the kind of machineries, cranes, or is it going to be a warehouse, so that we need to know the loads and the distribution of the loads. So correspondingly, in case of gantry, cranes and all, some special foundations will have to be provided. So, and sometimes the machineries will be very sensitive to settlement. For example, if you are designing foundation for antenna, radar antenna and all, slight tilt or settlement will make it misaligned with the satellite signals. And obviously, speaking in a general way, we should know what is the permissible settlement value for any structure and abide by that.
What do you think about geophysical investigation along with borehole investigation? That is one of the questions that is being asked.
I have my apprehensions about geophysical exploration. It may come good in a few cases like knowing the position of the rock bed, rock profile. But if there is an extensive investigation like it will be in the case of running pipelines or canals, and we would like to know the profile of the rock formation, so that can be used. But regarding the foundations for building, geotechnical investigation concerned with foundation of buildings, I think it should be, it cannot be relied upon because the interpretation will be very difficult. And in any case, it can't tell about the engineering properties or the index properties of the soil. So it comes good as far as the establishing the rock profile at the site.
The one of the questions: how to justify the under-reamed pile foundation capacity in waterlogged areas practically?
In fact, there is something like a ready reckoner provided by the Central Bureau of Building Research, CBRI, Central Building Research Institute. So this type of foundation can be used in case of expansive soils, so that they provide stability to the structure from getting lifted up due to the expansive behavior of lack of soil. And in any case, these piles are also designed. There is a code pertaining to this particular type of pile, design of particular type of pile. So the same principles apply. The thing is, the areas and the dimensions, everything should be factored because of the presence of this bulb at the bottom.
There's so many questions. I think last two questions we will take, sir. How to construct foundation in areas where water table is at ground level throughout the year?
It can be there. There is nothing one can do about it. All you have to do is plan a proper dewatering program, depress the water table during the foundation construction stage, And also, concreting should be done properly as per the specifications given in IS 456 for such a situation regarding the cover for the concrete and the quantity of cement and also the water cement ratio and so on. So the concreting should match with the conditions.
The last question of today's session, what should be the depth of excavation besides the existing building? How to decide on that?
There cannot be a general rule. It is not like one size fits all. One has to consider the mutual influence, which I was talking earlier. So the footings of the neighboring buildings can impose loads on the proposed structure as well. So one has to look into the details.
So thank you so much, sir, for that. A lot of questions have come. So I'm sure that your presentation has generated a lot of curiosity amongst the construction professionals. That is why a lot of questions keep coming. I think we can clarify it at some other thing. So with those few words, I thank once again for having spared your time for talking to all the professionals. In fact, most of us would have understood the importance of geotechnical engineering. It goes without saying that foundation has to be stronger, for which we need to understand. And in that aspect, you have covered the misconceptions in investigation, which from a practical perspective is very useful. So tomorrow again, we would be having another webinar at 11 a.m. by Engineer Anirudhan, and he would be talking about case studies in geotechnical engineering, importance of that. And day after tomorrow, we have
everybody once again. I thank everybody once again.
Oh, thank you so much, sir. Yeah, I think all are. Thank you so much. And day after tomorrow, we would be having the final talk by Professor of IIT, Dudha Gaudar sir, on again geotechnical this thing. And I think yesterday we started off with a very good note by the various organizers, and after that we had a wonderful talk by Professor Madhav. In fact, Engineer S. Prakash of ACCI started off with the opening ceremony with Dr. M.U. Ashwath, President of ACCI. Dr. G.L. Shivakumar Babu, President of Indian Geotechnical Society, had spoken yesterday. Dr. Parsarthi of Chairman, IGS Bangalore Center. Dr. T.N. Nagabhushan, Principal SJCE. And Dr. Rohini Nagapadma, Madam of Principal of NIE. All of them started off with their opening remarks yesterday, and with the talk by Professor Madhav, and now the talk by Engineer Mohan Prasad was an eye-opener. And we would be having 2 more talks tomorrow as well as day after tomorrow. Please log in at 11 a.m. tomorrow, and we would be again having a very interesting interaction, a presentation on the critical aspect of geotechnical engineering. So with those few words, I thank the speaker of the day. I thank all the construction professionals who have logged in and who have taken off their time to understand this critical aspect of construction, because as they say that many of them give importance to slab concreting, column concreting in some cases, but what about foundations and investigations? I think that needs to be taken very seriously. And with those notes, I thank the speaker of the day, and I thank all of you for having joined us. Thank you so much, sir.